Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Alvin Josephi of WOR's Special Features Division, speaking to you from the Hayden Planetarium of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Outside the windows of the world tonight, riding low in the eastern sky, is the great red planet Mars, easily seen from Earth as a brilliant salmon-colored star. On the calendars of men of science, and particularly astronomers, this is a very important evening, for Mars and our own Earth have swung on their respective orbits until they are the closest they have been together since 1924. All over the world tonight, telescopes are trained into space, and a little later on this program, WOR engineers, working in collaboration with Dr. Clyde Fisher, Curator-in-Chief of the Hayden Planetarium, will attempt to send the first radio signal ever transmitted through that space to the fiery red planet. But now, as that mysterious planet speeds on through space, widening the gap between it and the Earth, it's time to present the second half of this special feature broadcast. A switch is snapped, and we hear now from Dave Driscoll.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you from a giant radio receiving station at Baldwin, Long Island, a radio receiving station through which the Mutual Network relays broadcasts from the four corners of the Earth. On either side of me are banks of powerful receiving sets tuned to frequencies ranging from 3 to 20,000 meters. Operators have been manning these receivers since 10:30 this evening, listening for a possible signal from Mars. In the background, you can hear a composite of all the sounds being heard on these frequencies. The business of Earth, the traffic of armies and navies, news copy, friendly wireless conversation of amateurs on the continents of the world, all blending into a symphony of sound, whirling back and forth across the forests and oceans of the Earth, man's most modern means of communication. Thus far this evening, we've heard only a few sounds which we've not been able to identify, and there's little reason to believe that they did not originate at an Earth transmitter. With us are a large group of New York and New Jersey newspapermen and Dr. Clyde Fisher, the Curator-in-Chief of the Hayden Planetarium of the American Museum of Natural History, who is here acting as observer for his organization. And a few miles away at Hicksville, Long Island, the giant code transmitter is ready to flash a 100,000-watt beam signal directly at Mars and provide the second chapter in our experiment. Our engineers propose to literally fire a signal through space in the hope it will be heard on Mars, and at the same time, and most important of all for us, be reflected off the surface of Mars and sent back to Earth to be picked up by these receivers. The transmitter, although some miles away from this point, may be operated from this building by remote control to provide the first experiment of this kind in history. Because a radio signal travels at the rate of 186,000 miles per second, it will take 3 minutes and 14 seconds approximately to travel from Earth to Mars. If it is reflected off the surface of the planet, it will take an equal amount of time to return to Earth. Therefore, 6 minutes and approximately 28 seconds will pass before we might expect to hear our signal return. And now, Engineer Charles Singer will press a key, and the dots and dashes that you will hear will be picked up as they are transmitted from a special antenna beamed at Mars. All right, here we go. All right, our signals are on their way, and if they have penetrated through the Kennelly Heaviside layer, a magnetic layer some 50 miles to 100 miles above the Earth, it is reasonable to believe that they will continue on through space and strike Mars. Normally, it is believed signals do not pass through this zone of maximum ionization and are reflected back to some part of Earth. However, some scientists believe signals do pass through and into space, and that is the purpose of this experiment tonight. Let's pause now and wait. If you'll be patient and see if we hear the signal return. Well, it should be here. Also, for the purposes of our experiment, the signal failed to return, and so we're going to conclude this broadcast in which we have attempted to send a signal to Mars and back to Earth. Presentation of the WOR Special Features Division, Dave Driscoll speaking, and this is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
Happened in Cuba somewhere 41, 42. I don't remember the dates, but the object, I don't know whether you call it an object and what I'd call it, but it wasn't too clear thing to see, and there were flashing holes. They looked like the ports of the ship, the only way I could express the holes, and it didn't seem to throw out light. It just seemed that the light was there. It would change colors.
And were you in the service at the time?
I was in the service and on duty. I was on guard post duty at the time.
What, in the Army?
Marines.
Marines.
And I don't know, just one of those things, and I never really stuck with me like the other guy. The other fellow, he reported it. He called it in the post. And he treated him like he was some kind of a nut, so probably that had something to do with me not mentioning it, too.
Did they instruct him not to talk about it? Or?
I don't remember, but they relieved him of post duty and things like that, and when we went in, I told them that I had seen it, too. They kind of looked at me as if I was a nut, but I didn't get pulled off post or anything like he did.
What did they say to you?
I don't remember them ever saying anything to me about it, really. They just counted it, didn't believe it or anything. That was...
You were in Cuba?
Seeing things. Yes, it was in Cuba on Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
And the thing that I particularly remember about is when it left, it seemed to be moving slow, but it was moving up and down and moving off, but it went fast because it was out of sight in a hurry.
Moved up and down.
It seemed to kind of float like. That's just about all I can remember of the thing. I don't remember it coming back. I don't know whether...
How close would you say it came to?
Well, I'd say it wasn't over 200-300 yards away at the most.
Is that all?
So,
how large did it appear to be?
It appeared that it was about the size of a bus or something like that in length. A bus, city bus, something like that, yeah. As near as I could tell from that distance.
It's a fairly sizable object then.
Mm-hmm.
And you could actually see lights separate.
I don't know whether you could call them lights or whether they were just luminous things. That's what I'd say more than anything.
They didn't seem to shine any.
They didn't seem to shine any light out or anything, no.
What kind of sound did it make?
I never heard any sound. I never noticed it if there was any.
And it came within 200 or 300 yards of it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel any heat or any other sensation?
No.
It's odd. When it took off, did it start moving faster, or did it always go at a slow pace?
It seemed like it was going slow, but it must have been going fast. And there was no noise. That's about all I can remember of it.
Remember anything about an outline or any kind of a shape to it?
Well, like I say, it was sort of elliptical-like.
Elliptical shape?
Yeah.
Did it appear that if you were looking straight on underneath it, that it would have been round, or do you think it would have been long and...
I don't know.
Looking at it,
I don't remember now. Never gave that any thought, I don't believe. It gave me the impression of being longer than round, though, more than round.
And you said the other fellow that reported seeing it, they took him off guard, did they?
Mm-hmm. They brought him right in off in post because he was upset. He really... It got to him, I guess. It bothered him. I don't know why it didn't bother me. It just... like as if it was something that, I can't explain it. It just didn't register too well with me, I guess you could say.
Did you see a number of different colors, or what type of color did you see?
It was red, greenish colors, purple, I think. There was white.
A wide variety of colors, and this was all around the edge?
No, there wasn't two. No, they seemed to be in one straight line.
Oh.
About the medium of the thing.
Was it at night?
It was at night. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember whether it was 4 to 12 or whether it was from midnight on. I don't remember that either.
We may have some reports, which I can look up back at that time, and Florida, Cuba, or somewhere in that area where somebody else might have seen it. And, of course, your sighting of it coming from an entirely different source could help to corroborate some other story and vice versa. So, the more information you remember, the better off it is for us. If you'd like to correlate these, because NICAP has been of the opinion for a good number of years the Air Force hides these things, and if the government was aware of things like this at that time, and it helps to...
Well, since I mentioned that down the class there, I've been trying to think about it, but just, I guess the same attitude I had towards it then, to just think too much about it. I can't remember too much about it or something.
Did it seem to be rotating?
No. I wouldn't say that it didn't appear to be rotating to me. The lights did have a effect, something like that. Like they might be moving in a rotation like, yeah.
I see, but you had the impression that the object itself wasn't, but that the lights were changing color around it, is that it?
Well, there was no lights around it. It was a funny-looking object, and it wasn't really a real definite outline. You couldn't say like it was something black against something white.
Yeah.
But I had the impression that it was, well, more or less in the shape something similar to elliptical. That's all I could call it.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, very good. And then that was about 41 or 42.
41 or 42, something like that.
This took place approximately in April 23, 1942, February 23, I guess, in Los Angeles, California. It was during a blackout, and there were many blackouts during the war period. About 1 a.m. in the morning, in the darkest of blackouts, the anti-aircraft started shooting off, just blowing the devil out of everything. We woke everyone up. Everyone come out, including the air raid wardens. I wanted to see what was going on. I looked up in the sky, and way high were a formation of approximately 6 to 9 white, in other words, luminous white dots in a group, close formation. It appeared to me like it was a triangular formation. During this time, as I recall, it seems to me there were searchlights on them. Whether the searchlights remained on them all the time, I'm not sure. They came in from the northwest, and they went to the southeast, approximately. The anti-aircraft was only reaching 2/3 of the way up to these objects, which meant that these objects were fairly high. Quite high. And some of this anti-aircraft, the shells, casings come down and went in the restaurants, broke glass windows and did some minor damage. As there were rumors going around after the day after and for a week that someone had seen a object or plane crash, I think, out in South L.A., and maybe another spot, I believe, near Compton. In other words, there were these rumors going around like there had been a crash or something, but for weeks and months later, nothing was given out about this, and to this day, no one has admitted, actually, that a Japanese plane, officially, I'm pretty sure, no one has admitted that it was a Japanese plane shot down. A few days or a week before, the Japanese had shelled the coast, I think about 40 or 50 miles north. And that shelled, I guess, they tried to shell some oil wells, oil installation. There were some reports that the plane or 2 or 3 had been launched from these submarines, Japanese submarines, and had come over, and that the Japanese planes were the cause of all this commotion in anti-aircraft. The answer was that they launched 2 or 3 planes from submarines, you see. I believe the night or 2 before, or the night or 2 after, there were another small flight or objects went over. Now these, I'm not denying that this could have been maybe 6, or so high balloons that might have retained their close formation.
In 1942, in June, we went on the bombing mission. I was flying bombers, Wellingtons, over Ruhr, or otherwise so-called Happy Valley. And the trip was, we performed everything what was necessary, dropped the bombs on the target, and on the way back, while we were flying over the Zuiderzee, which is the part of Holland, my rear gunner reported an aircraft approaching from the rear. I told him that if this object comes too close, then we'll have to open the fire on him. And my idea was that perhaps it was a German fighter aircraft equipped with the searchlight in the nose. So when this thing came close, I wouldn't take any chance on it, and I told my rear gunner to give him a blast. So then he opened the fire on him, maybe 200 yards. And at that distance, this object was almost the size of the moon, which was also visible at the same time, maybe possibly a bit bigger. We used the tracers in the machine guns. There were 4 machine guns in the rear turret, and while this rear gunner was shooting, we could follow exactly the trajectory of the shells which were entering that particular target. Now, the peculiar thing about it was that those were just going in, and that was the end of it. They wouldn't fall down. And so-called tracers, those tracers would just enter, and that was it. Now, that lasted for possibly, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes. And after that time, this shining object suddenly changed the position, and at a terrific speed moved over to our port side, almost at the same distance, about 200 yards from the wing. And then it stayed there. Of course, then both rear gunner and the front gunner opened the fire on my order, and I could see the tracers entering the target again from under 2 angles, at which I was sure that this was pretty close to 200 yards then, because you could see the angle of crossing the tracers. After a while, it moved up, took off at fantastic speed at least 45 degrees angle, and they just disappeared between the stars.
James V. Forrestal, speaking from Guam.
You can be confident of them, of the Marines, of the Army Air Forces, and you can be confident of their leaders, of men like Major General LeMay of the 21st Bomber Command.
We return you to the United States.
Picked this bogey up when I was aboard ship and seen this spot in the moon that had blotted out part of the moon and then disappeared. Like I say, I was on the starboard wing lookout. It was a very moonlight night. The moon was high, figuring 60 degrees straight overhead. The moon was at about 45 or 50 degrees and bright. Something blotted out some of the light, like the ship was turning. In other words, if the ship were to turn and go the other way, it would throw the moon at the 50-degree angle only on the other side, say, of the ship. So it would be natural, or was inclined to look around and wonder what was happening to the light. And so I glanced up at the moon. Here, part of the moon was blocked out. And at the same time, I blinked my eyes, looked, and it just disappeared into a smaller and smaller speck immediately. It didn't take over 2 or 3 seconds, it seemed, into the moon. And immediately, like our orders were aboard ship, report anything you see, and anything you hear, and anything you think you see, and anything you think you hear. So here was something I thought I'd seen. I didn't I didn't really believe that I'd seen it.
At your first observation of this, did it appear quite large in relationship to the moon?
Yes, large enough, extremely large to the extent that it was actually some of it extruding, the shadow extruding beyond the edge of the moon and then a ways over into the moon. The only question that the officer deck asked me about it, how close do you feel this shadow that you thought you'd seen was to the ship? I said, I don't know, sir. He said, make a guess. And I said, quarter of a mile. And the only thing that has ever even made me remember, in other words, probably that night or the following day, I would have forgotten the incident and never remembered it. The only thing that ever caused me to remember it was looking for Thomas to get in this poker game, this radarman. Well, apparently he's got his radar tore apart there looking for a bogey in it that had appeared the night before, and then when he picked his paper up to start charting his bogey, it was gone. He said the bogey still got to be in there. He laid his machine back and we went and played poker, and I don't know whether he ever found his bogey in the machine or not. We didn't know.
The late days of World War II finally brought the war to my quiet home in Minnesota. Since Tokyo was over 6,000 miles away, our mutual slaughter had largely been carried out in the Pacific Ocean. Then, in January 1945, we learned about Japan's secret weapon. She was trying to ignite our mainland with incendiary bombs. The bombs drifted over North America carried by 30-foot diameter balloons made of fine Japanese mulberry paper called washi. The bomb was mounted on a horizontal ring below the balloon, along with a complex array of small sandbags. The hydrogen expanded by day, and the balloon rose until a sensor detected that it was too high. Then it vented some hydrogen. As the balloon shrank by night, it fell until another sensor dropped sandbags. Finally, after 3 such cycles, the sensor lit a long fuse and vented the remaining hydrogen. The balloon then landed on American soil, and soon after, it exploded. At first we thought these bombs were being released by submarines off the west coast. Then we saw the balloons were too big and far too numerous. They would have taken too many submarines. Once we'd found a few sandbags, the Geological Survey set out to learn where the sand came from. Sand carries a distinct fingerprint of mineral content, occasional coral fragments, fossilized diatoms. A diatom is a kind of single-celled creature that makes up algae. Their detective work soon pinned down a region near Tokyo. The bombs were making an astonishing journey all the way from Japan, something no one had thought possible. We didn't know that Japanese meteorologists had discovered a jet stream moving very fast at altitudes over 30,000 feet. The balloons rode that jet stream and got here in a scant 3 days. So bombs fell harmlessly near Klamath Falls, Oregon, and Bigelow, Kansas. They fell in remote corners of Manitoba, Colorado, Texas, and Mexico. They reached Iowa, North Dakota, even Michigan. None landed in St. Paul, but, oh, Father Christmas, how this 14-year-old boy longed to see one. Meanwhile, the Japanese press said panic was gripping America, which was now in flames. Forensic geologist John McPhee tells the story of this byroad in military history. It seems that only one balloon bomb actually killed anyone. That one landed in the Cascade Mountains. 5 Sunday school children and their minister's wife, all on a fishing trip, found it just before it exploded. It killed all 6. But I said this was a tale of 2 secret weapons. Another balloon bomb tangled in an electric line at the Hanford plant and cut the power. For a while, it shut down the production of plutonium for the very bomb that would fall on Nagasaki only 5 months later. I'm John Lienhard at the University of Houston.
What happened was, in that time, during the last period of the war, that various mysterious things seemed to be going on over our air in Sweden. And for a long time we didn't know what it was. And then the strange thing happened that one of these things landed. And there was great secrecy about it at the time. We didn't get to know much. The whole thing, of course, went into pieces when it got into the ground in place in southern Sweden, but our military people very diligently collected all the bits that they could find, and they packed it all off to England. And the British were able to figure out what it was. And so, although perhaps it didn't help them much, they really were prepared for what was going to happen. They were able to figure out how this thing was functioning. What had happened was simply that this was one projectile that was being tested from Peenemünde, and that had got out of its intended orbit. If I remember right, true, that not during the last period of the war, but after, shortly after, there were observations of some kind of objects that were seen over the Baltic. I cannot say for sure if they were seen actually over Sweden, that were believed to have come from Russian test stations situated in the Baltic.
Sergeant and four assistants were testing a radar set in a lonely suburb. Suddenly an intense signal flashed on the set, a far bigger ship that would have been obtained by any ordinary aircraft. The signal came from an object which on the radar screen appeared to be elliptical, round either like a platter or spherical, round like a ball. Couldn't tell which. The five radar men knew they were dealing with a mysterious metallic object about the size of a very large bomber. For 15 minutes, the strange signal persisted, and the object sped off over the English countryside at a height of about 60,000 feet. There were other witnesses. Two RAF officers flying a jet at 20,000 feet at the same time, and they report seeing a force-release phenomenon quite in color. They say the huge spheroid was giving off or reflecting a fierce light, but it passed their plane at an upper altitude at tremendous speed in excess of 1,000 miles an hour. Please do not ask me for any further particulars. When I get them and can release them, I will broadcast them. Today's report is not minor hearsay. This is officially reported by the British War Office. There are other witnesses. The Sergeant Harry Wallace says he looked at it from the ground through a telescope, and even at that altitude, it would appear like a tennis ball. Seemed to hang stationary for minutes at a time and then move rapidly. He estimates its size at about 4 times the size of the British airliner, which is in some conflict with the estimate of those who watched it on radar. The British Air Ministry says there will be no official comment, except that 3 other sightings of strange objects in the British sky were reported between September 14 and September 22. It is on the basis of the repetition that they decided to make this occurrence public.
It was while I was searching for this crash that I noticed a terrific blue flash pass nose of my airplane. I noticed that the flash came from a chain of very peculiar-looking objects that were rapidly approaching Mount Rainier at about 107 degrees. This chain of objects were 9 in number. I assumed at the time they were a new formation or a new type of jet, though I was baffled by the fact that they did not have any tails. It passed almost directly in front of me, but at a distance of about 23 miles, which is not very great in the air. I judged their wingspan to be at least 100 feet across. The sighting did not particularly disturb me at the time, except that I had never seen planes of that type. I never could understand at that time why the world got so upset about this, as these things didn't seem to be a menace. Believed they had something to do with our Army and Air Force. Now, of course, some of the reports they did take from newspapers which did not quote me properly. Now, when I told the press, they misquoted me, and in the excitement of it all, one newspaper and another one got it so in its were talking about, I guess. These objects more or less fluttered like they were, I'd say boats on very rough water or a very rough air of some type. And when I described how they flew, I said that they flew like you take a saucer and throw it across the water. Most of the newspapers misunderstood and misquoted that, too. They said that I said that they were saucer-like. I said they flew in a saucer-like fashion. I more or less have reserved an opinion as to what I think. Naturally, being a natural-born American, if it's not made by our science or our Army Air Forces, I'm inclined to believe that it's of an extraterrestrial origin. Well, I'll tell you this much. All the airline pilots, none of us have appreciated being laughed at. We made our reports essentially to begin with because we thought that if our government didn't know what it was only our duty to report it to our nation and to our Air Force out of it. I think it's something that is of concern to every person in the country. And I don't think it's anything for people to get hysterical about. Now, that's just my frank opinion of it.
Whatever it was, certainly created a lot of interest. And I say whatever it was because, frankly, I am still wondering. It was on Friday night, the 27th of June, somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. Our neighbor, Mrs. Caffrey, my wife, and I were sitting on the porch when we saw this bright, shiny object moving in an arc-like path across the sky. The thing was about the size of an automobile headlight, and it appeared to be giving off a bright red fire from the front and blue from the back. We couldn't exactly say it was a flying disc we had been hearing about on the radio. Rather, we suspected it might have been a large meteor. I took a lot of kidding about the thing until the papers published a story about the American Meteor Society's report that a fireball, a type of meteor, may have landed that night in northern New York or Vermont. And I hope it was a meteor. Then maybe folks will stop phoning at 2 a.m. asking if I have found the cup to go with my flying saucers.
Exactly when and where did you see your saucer, Mr. Brummett? It was about dark 2 weeks ago, the day before reports were carried in the papers all over the country. I saw it from the front porch in Elizabethton for about 5 seconds. The front part of the object was oval-shaped. It was a dark bluish color and had a flaming red tail. It was moving horizontal to the earth just like an airplane, but it wasn't, for the light was quivering.
You say it had a red tail. Could it have been a falling star?
No, sir. I've seen many a falling star in my life, but never anything like this flying saucer before. It was too bright and too red to be a star.
Well, Warden Brummett, there's a rumor in these parts that the dancing disc might be atomic energy on the loose from Oak Ridge.
I don't believe that. If it had anything to do with atomic energy, the government would have announced it by this time, certainly.
Well, thank you, State Game Warden Ernest Brummett.
No doubt you have been reading reports of the so-called flying saucers seen over America. As a leading British scientist, what's your opinion of them?
Well, I must say that, in my opinion, it must be due to mass hysteria. I know you've got to be very careful nowadays. What with war, atom bombs, people feeling rather tired, and excitements of that kind, rockets, and so on, people like to believe things. And don't forget this. Everybody likes to say, I saw it. They think it's rather clever.
Do you think it might be an optical illusion?
No, I don't. I don't think so.
Do you think there's any chance at all that these flying saucers might be man-made objects of some kind?
I think it's very unlikely. There is just the rather wild chance that someone is experimenting with a new kind of radar foxing device. You will remember the radar camouflage which were used in the war, made of metallized paper. Well, if you imagine a rocket fired 200 miles high and discharging these saucers of some kind of metal, it just might be an experiment. But I don't believe it.
You think it's mass hysteria, eh?
I do. I always remember going to a spiritualistic seance, and I found that if I said, look at that lovely blue light, everybody else saw it too, although I saw absolutely nothing.
In other words, you really don't expect to see a flying saucer come down in Piccadilly Circus here in London, eh?
No, I wish to goodness I could. I'm sure Poor old Eros will be quite surprised. I should be delighted.
How was that?
Well, the only place I've read about them so far is in Brighton. And, of course, Brighton, well, it's such a charming place, you might see almost anything there. And another man, by the way, said that he saw one of them flying so high that he didn't know whether it was a house, an aeroplane, or the top of a ginger beer bottle. Now, I think he was very lucky. Well, we don't have anything quite so strong as that over here.
I say. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Lowe.
And here's Kyle Walker, whose connection with the flying saucers goes back to a new game he's invented. Now, Mr. Walker, tell us how your game has anything to do with those saucers.
Well, my game is called Spin Sailor. It's played with lightweight aluminum discs. A few weeks ago, I decided that the game needed some publicity, so I turned over several hundred special duplicates of the discs to an advertising man who flies his own plane. I told him to drop them into the air over the Midwest, the Pacific Coast, and Canada between June the 20th and July the 4th.
But what's your advertising stunt got to do with the flying saucers?
Don't you see? Some of the gadgets are 2 feet in diameter, made of rubber, inflated with gas and covered with luminous paint. After starting to spin around in the air, they may go as far as 1,000 miles. And they would look very much as those flying saucers have been described. I'll admit I can't prove that the saucers are my gadget swishing around through space, but they may be.
These have actually been seen by 3 youngstowners. City Patrolman George Maxim declared he saw 9 round objects sailing at high speed from south to north about 3 a.m. one night last May while he was on his beat on East Front Street in Youngstown. Maxim described the objects as rolling hoops or balloons moving at about 300 to 400 feet in the air. He said they resembled balloons used by meteorologists and were directly in line, one behind the other. The patrolman said he watched them until they moved out of sight to the north. Mr. and Mrs. Walter Johnson of Youngstown reported seeing a luminous round object as they sat on their porch at about 8:30 p.m. Saturday. Johnson said his hobby is watching shooting stars, and he was certain that this object, which he said was clear-cut all around with no fiery tail, could not have been the meteor. He said it floated slowly at a 45-degree angle toward the Earth and disappeared to the northeast.